Our generation has been taught from the moment that we got these devices that you can't trust anything that you see online. And if everything is online, you're not going to trust anything because you've been taught not to.
People of any age need to maintain their critical thinking and not simply watch and listen to and read things that they agree with 100%.
The person deciding what ChatGPT says is true or false is the most powerful editor-in-chief in America.
This is Open to Debate, and I'm Nick Gillespie. This is our second installment in a series we're calling Generational Divides, in which we gather together three different generations, in this case, a boomer, a zoomer, and a millennial, to see where the dividing lines fall. Today we're talking about the state of news and journalism, which is often in the news, and again recently when the Washington Post announced it was laying off 1/3 of its staff and cutting entire departments, including the books desk and sports section. The rest of the news is often reported in ways that make it seem very grim days indeed. A century ago, the number of newspapers was around 24,000. Now that number is closer to 6,000, with the majority of them being weeklies, not even daily newspapers. The major news networks have seen a steep decline in viewership, and trust and confidence in the news has sunk to 28% of Americans expressing faith. Yet, the internet has brought an explosion of blogging, websites, and podcasts. There are, by virtually all accounts, more places to access more information, more opinions in the ether than ever before. Anyone can start a platform, start a podcast, and build a following. So are we, despite the swan song of certain places, actually in a golden age of news media? That's where I want to kick off. Let's meet our panelists. As our resident Zoomer, we have Rachel Janfaza. She's the founder of The Up and Up, a Substack that covers the intersection of youth culture and politics. She's also a freelance journalist and a contributor to The Bulwark. Next to her, we have our boomer, Kurt Anderson. Kurt has been in the industry a while, having co-founded Spy magazine in 1986, which poked fun at the media industry, among other topics. And I'll admit that I loved the magazine as a young adult. He's also a writer, a novelist, and a former host on public radio. And finally, we have our millennial, Nellie Bowles. Nellie is a journalist who spent many years at the New York Times covering tech and internet culture. She left in 2021 and co-founded the Free Press with her wife, Barry Weiss, who now runs CBS News. Thank you for all coming out. Rachel, I want to start with you. You're the youngest on the panel. You're a digital native in a way the rest of us are not. How would you characterize what's happening in the news landscape right now, especially for Gen Z, for your readership, your cohort? For young people, is this a golden age for news media, or is it doom and gloom?
For Gen Z, I would argue that this is a golden age of news. There, as you said, is more access to information than any time before. There is no dearth of content you can be consuming at any point in time. But I think the way that our generation consumes content is very different than any generation before us. We are constantly scrolling on our devices. That's where we get news. That's where we get entertainment. That's where we get culture. That's where we get pop culture. It's where we get sports. It's where we get conversations with our friends. And so all of these things often blend together at one time, which can be both overwhelming, but it can also come with real consequences of mistaking certain information for fact when it actually is opinion, and it's all blended together in one place. But at the same time, I think there's a massive opportunity because everyone is reachable. There's a huge audience for any individual, any organization, and it's just about finding the ways to resonate authentically that will actually reach the folks that you're trying to.
And authenticity seems to be a big focus for Gen Z. We're going to come back to that issue and the way that it functions in today's mediascape. Nellie, where do you...
They get their news from TikTokers. It's
Yeah.
the most authentic,
Oh my God.
it's
Wow.
the most authentic
Pops,
place
yeah.
you could get your news. It's just random people.
So random people as opposed to CBS News, right?
As opposed to professional, trained.
Is this a good time? You're flexing with your New York Times pedigree that you left for some reason, but is this a good time or a bad time for media, for news?
I would say the millennial position in news, or at least my position in news, is we still believe in the institutions. We want the institutions to be great, but we have lost faith in the institutions. The Zoomer no longer even is rooting for the old institutions. They don't even care. They're not reading the Washington Post.
Why did millennials lose faith?
in my experience, and for the experience of people in my cohort, I think we saw the old media and we saw its profound failings. And we kind of saw past the curtain.
What's an example, real quick, of what was a profound failing where you're a millennial and you're like, oh my God, I forget this. I'm never trusting them again.
I think there was a huge crash in trust around COVID, around lockdowns and the coverage of lockdowns, the coverage of the impact of school closures, the coverage of COVID origins. You could look at the coverage of Hunter Biden's laptop, and you could look at the around 2020, 2021. I think there was, I mean, the numbers say there's a huge crash in trust across the board, not just on the right or on the left. I think there was just a crash in trust. And I think before, when you couldn't see a reporter's Twitter feed, you could believe that they were objective.
Right.
And you could believe that they were trying their best to tell an objective story. Obviously, no one's perfectly objective, but you could believe they were trying their best. All of a sudden, in my generation, you could start to see fellow reporters' Twitter feeds and social media, and you could start to realize, wait a minute, these guys aren't objective, and they don't even want to be objective. And I, at least personally, felt a major kind of crash in my own, in the myth that I truly believed. And I realized that the myth was what it was. It was a myth, it was a lie.
One thing I would say about, just as you say, Gen Z gets their media and everything, pop culture, music, news, everything through this little screen. Well, that was TV as well. Yeah. I mean, and the extraordinary thing about television was that, like drama, comedy, news, everything is there. And put a radio next to it and it's, in a sense, our little phones are just, radios and TVs and everything else.
But didn't you, I agree with that, and we've lost that kind of awe of how transformative TV in particular was as a medium, but when you talk about a phone, it's like your friend is texting you,
yes,
and you might be sitting next to them, but you're communicating.
And there are literally many, many thousands of, YouTube shows and podcasts and everything else, so it's vastly different. Yeah. But in terms of the melange of everything coming in one place, that's no different. In terms of, objectivity, I'm not, objectivity as a word, as a concept of what journalism is supposed to be, has probably always been unfortunate, because nobody is objective, of course. What there is, and what I still think actually the great institutions of journalism, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, for instance, others, The Economist, are doing is a fair-minded search for the truth. And sometimes that means saying this is a stupid left-wing overreach, and many, many, many more times in the last year or 10, meaning look at what the right is doing. So that's different to me than objectivity.
Right.
And I think the problem with objectivity became like the voice from nowhere, as people talked about it. And I think that was legit. But I don't know.
Kurt, like me, you grew up with people like Walter Cronkite and I guess David Brinkley and Chet Huntley, or these, talking heads. They spoke with the voice of God, whether on TV or radio. Many people of our generation tend to say, oh, that was a great moment because we had a single narrative. We believed in something in common, and they were doing their best, even if they were wrong. They were, do you feel like we're in a golden age of news now that model is gone for good?
I do. I feel as much as my co-panelists feel about we are in a golden age of news in terms of multiplicity of channels and not a relatively narrow consensus version of the truth governing as much of media as it did when we were young.
So can I ask you, the proliferation of podcasting as a medium, how do you make sense of a world where the marketplace of ideas has expanded? So it's like Ezra Klein and Candace Owens, like in any marketplace of ideas, is it always going to be a total mix of what you as a consumer would consider good and bad, or how do we sift through that?
Yes, it's always going to be a mix. The problem is the abandonment of empirical reality and provable facts. That just is, to me, the single most dangerous thing we have going in terms of the media, which is always been a broad thing with, it's hard to talk about as one thing, but now it's a meaningless phrase.
You're going to insist that we actually did land on the moon?
I continue to believe that.
Can I ask?
Despite all evidence, why was the flag blowing, Kurt?
Nellie had pointed out the idea that you're reading the New York Times, you're reading mainstream publications or ABC News or something, and then suddenly something changes, and you realize the people who are speaking authoritatively in elite institutions. And you're like, oh, they are highly motivated actors who are like me, and they have emotions and weird preferences or predilections. Does that happen with Gen Z? I mean, like this quest for authenticity, when you see somebody who is perfect on camera speaking into their phone, does Gen Z sense that that's fake too, that that's put on?
Yeah, Gen Z doesn't like anything to be overproduced. I mean, the reality is that our generation has been taught from the moment that we got these devices that you can't trust anything that you see online. And if everything is online, you're not going to trust anything because you've been taught not to. So I think that has been a core part. Nellie was talking about the decline in trust in news, and I think that's a part of why our generation is so distrusting, is because they're very discerning, and they want to know, like you asked, what is the motive behind? For them, they'll take a fact as a fact, but they want to know the motive behind it. And in a sort of, there's lots of talk about a quote unquote post-truth era where everyone has their own version of the truth. Yeah. Personal experience matters in how you perceive the truth, and I think that's why individual personalities who are being as upfront as they can be about where they're coming to a story from are having the most, the tightest relationship with their viewer and are gaining the most trust. It's about being upfront about where you're coming to the story from.
You could say that all of these micro influencers, these micro newsmakers, are in a way kind of the end of media, like the death of media. Because what was media as we conceived of it? It was a collective storytelling. It was a collective search for truth, search for narrative of our experience, all here together. And with the fracturing of that our generation went through and your generation now lives in, that collective storytelling effort is gone. No one's trying to do that anymore. It's dead. So what is the media? And I would say that the collective storytelling effort that we're going to see in the next 5-10 years is going to be through AI. It's going to be through who controls the narrative of AI companies, like who's deciding what Anthropic decides is true. And
so
that's the new most powerful editor-in-chief. The person deciding what ChatGPT says is true or false is the most powerful editor-in-chief in America.
Okay, I think you're kind of misstating what AI does, except perhaps for Elon Musk's Grok, which is actually a partisan trained to tell Musk-friendly stories. So yes, the collective narrative, that's not untrue, I get that. But there was also, importantly, about institutions and traditions within journalism, if we're talking about journalism, is standards of rigor for fact-checking and factual truth. So yes, as you say, different lived experiences give different perceptions of the truth, absolutely. But that, once it's, should I trust this person on TikTok talking about this thing for 3 minutes? I find her, authentic and interesting, but is that true? So having some basis for trusting the rigor of the process is, to me, not unimportant.
Is that, by the way, is that something that has ended with, Time Life, which was a behemoth? I mean, they have a giant building somewhere in Manhattan that, they had standards. Condé Nast, and, which is a kind of crumbling empire of an old style of magazine publication. They have fact checkers, they do all of that. Is that gone? Is that gone, or has it shifted into different modes?
I would say say The Atlantic, to which I contribute, does still rigorous human fact checking. As the Times, there are good reporters and less good reporters in terms of their rigor. So I don't think it's gone. And I also, back to AI, 2 cheers for AI, I've learned in the last year to use Anthropic's Claude is my chosen AI, to be very useful, both in for instance, in just getting a take on some bit of the news that the newspapers and so on haven't made clear to me. Like, I was curious about this thing in ICE enforcement, immigration enforcement. Like, well, tell me the difference between judicial warrants and administrative warrants, and why one is more important in this instance. And I got this, and then had a conversation with it about, well, clarify this. So this
this is what I'm saying.
No. But
that's now the
100%.
New York Times for you. That is explaining ICE to you.
But I'm saying,
that's amazing.
I'm saying it's more, to me,
And
at this
powerful.
moment, more trustworthy than any given, you can be, than the free press
I
can
would
be,
argue-
God knows.
I would push back a little bit and say that actually, I do listening sessions with groups of Gen Zers, and they don't trust AI either. They're using it every day, but they're super skeptical of it because, again, they know not to trust anything.
Let's talk about the Washington Post specifically, because this has been a big story recently. You know, this is institution in legacy news and reporting. It's, it broke Watergate. It has had an outsized impact on American culture, certainly over all of our lifetimes. And it went from being a kind of small regional paper to being, one of the great papers in America, purchased by Jeff Bezos in 2013, who pledged to keep out of its way editorially, dumped a lot of money into it.
Made it a great website.
It had been an early great website as well.
Yeah,
from
but
Dollar He spent a lot of money.
Showed interest in the beginning.
Circulation, readership grew from 2016 up to about 2020. Lately, though, now, and especially after in the last presidential election, when the newspaper announced very late in the day that they were not going to be doing presidential endorsements, subscriptions dropped precipitously. The focus of the newspaper, they've cut other departments, but they're beefing up the op-ed section. And they've laid off nearly a third of the staff across the paper. Is this navel gazing to care about this, Nellie, why is this important?
Okay, first of all, I think pulling the Kamala endorsement was a huge mistake, and even tacking to the middle. They're sort of doing this, we're trying to be objective, we're following data, they're going to tack towards the center. Huge mistake. They should 100% tack to the left. They should be to the left of the New York Times. The Kamala endorsement was exactly what they should do. They should have, there's a niche there. The middle, they lost their whole audience. Like, who's the Washington Post reader who's a centrist? That's not, anyways.
So Jeff Bezos has been bad news for the Washington Post.
Well, it's really funny because right now Will Lewis is the villain of the moment,
who's
right?
the publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everyone is like villainizing him. He's getting sort of infamous, which is great because it's like a little bit of glare off CBS for a few minutes. Thank God.
I was going to say the same thing.
It's fabulous. So I'm obviously like we're paying for more Will Lewis content to go up in Twitter. But the crazy thing is that Jeff Bezos was completely overseeing this. Yeah. Will Lewis then has to become the hatchet man doing the layoffs. Then now Bezos is going to come back in and hire everyone's friends, and he will still have a perfect reputation. People will. Basically, people are too scared to actually criticize him in a full-throated way, and Will Lewis is an easier. Will Lewis is an easier punching bag.
Sure, but who's afraid to criticize Jeff Bezos?
The focus on Will Lewis alone is it's like, why is he becoming so famous from this? And now I read a story this morning that, in fact, the layoffs were Will's idea, and Jeff originally was not in favor of the layoffs at all, and only agreed after Will insisted. You don't think that's PR spin?
Of course it's PR spin. But I'm saying
genius PR spin.
Nobody beyond this table and another 1,000 people know who he is.
I know.
Everybody knows.
We're
who
talking
Jeff
niche.
Bezos is.
We're talking niche.
Do you think is America worse off because the Washington Post employs fewer reporters?
Well, sure, not radically, but it was a great paper, as you say, and has been a great paper. And I mean. It's interesting that you talk about they shouldn't have done this politically or not. Yes, the not doing an endorsement because it was Kamala running against Trump was weak and stupid and wrong to start the new.
Although it is true, there's a trend towards papers not endorsing.
Yes,
candidates.
And my point: who cared about that? That didn't matter.
Right.
They lost a lot of subscribers.
Well, I know, and I wasn't one of them, as all of my fellow left liberal friends were.
200.
Because there were still lots and lots of great reporters and writers that I read there. And then it wasn't just this thing the last few weeks, it was over the last year more that, no, there you go. Yeah. They clearly, he Bezos, a certain point, like in November of 2024, decide, nope, I know where my bed's buttered on, and it's these giant government contracts for Amazon, effectively, and if I want to have a space program, that. And so, like, no, Washington Post, he should have, it's the amount, yes, he loses a lot of money, $70-80 million a year on it. Okay, that is that's pocket change to a guy who has $250 million.
But that's also, it's his paper, right? So he can do what he wants.
But the motives and intentions for owning a paper, they seem good. Everybody who worked for him said, yeah, no, he's pretty good. Marty Barron, yeah, he was good until he wasn't, And so he gave in to his, cravenness, cowardness, whatever, instead of just selling it, instead of ruining it. To me, he's the villain, and it's sad and awful.
Do you have any, do you think
the Washington Post is an old newspaper.
I've written for it.
There's a movie about it.
Do people, do Gen Z, I will say as a baby boomer, like, I care about stuff, but like, why should I really care that the Washington Post is slumping? That happened, nobody cares when dry cleaners go out of business because nobody gets dry cleaning anymore. Nobody's going to care when Reason goes out of business, which it never will. But
so there are 2 points that I want to make. The first is that yes, I think this is a very highbrow conversation, and most of America doesn't really, isn't talking about these layoffs in the way. Even though we know so many people who are affected by these layoffs, I have friends who are affected by these layoffs, and there should be empathy for that, of course. I think the other point that I want to make is about what this is telling young journalists. There aren't that many jobs available for young journalists right now. And if we're talking about the future of media, and is this the golden age of media, a question that we really have to grapple with is there going to be will there be job opportunities for the next generation of journalists, or will they be content creators? And I think, I talk a lot about the blurry line between a journalist and a content creator. And that is something that, I think there's not a real answer to. You can argue it both ways, but the moral of the story is that the journalist jobs look really different, and they have to look different. And a place like the Washington Post, 5 years ago was going to start this program where they were doing more content creation and leaning more into TikTok, and it looked really promising at the time. And I think that the sort of, foot was taken off the pedal on that, and I think that would have been a good route to go down, and it would have created more opportunities for young journalists.
Well, those opportunities are there, but now not under the umbrella of the Washington Post, right? Right,
and so, Nellie was saying before about how the journalists at an institution like the Washington Post have gone through a training, and there's a certain level of credibility that's associated with it. And yes, again, everyone comes into it with their perspective, etc. And that's something that Gen Z audiences are really cognizant of. But I think, if we're going to have an ecosystem where individual content creators or even individuals within organizations are who people are looking to for their news and information, there should still be apparatus and there should still be training programs and ways to make sure that the people who are delivering the content are doing so in a way that adheres to some code of ethics. And I think social media companies have a role to play there too.
To drill down on the ethics thing, I think the fundamental difference and what we're talking about with like trust and the training, all this is who is paying someone? Who are they being paid by? So you do not know who is paying an influencer. You know that if a reporter's at the New York Times or at the Washington Post, they will be fired if they're discovered to be being paid. I mean, I'm sure there are corrupt ones, but it would be a fireable offense. Whereas it's the normal course of life for an influencer. So I think that's like the crisis is, are we getting news from paid operatives, or are we getting news from people who are to some extent still swearing sort of an oath of loyalty to an old model of journalism?
Kurt, do you feel like when you look at, say, the archetypal Gen Zoomer, or a projection of that, or of younger people in general, are they capable of the media literacy that the new world really, depends on, right? Because news, it's not news from nowhere anymore. It's news from everywhere and by everybody.
Well, I think that trusting nothing can be the flip side of believing anything, and that's a dangerous flip side of a coin. So one has to combine ultra skepticism with ultra credulity in a funny way. So there's that.
Just to pick up on that, though, that also seems to me, Spy did this, the Daily Show definitely did this, where it was teaching people how to read the news critically.
That's the thing. And people, that's what people need. I mean, to have people of any age need to have learned how to be, as they say, the boring phrase, media literate, right? And maintain their critical thinking, and not simply watch and listen to and read things that they agree with 100%. I'm not interested in you. You're not going to be a good citizen or somebody I want to be friends with, period, if that's true.
By the way, young people are the first to say that there needs to be more media literacy, and that it's very confusing and no one's explaining it. And I think that there's so much noise about how Gen Z consumes news. They're seeing that, they're hearing that, and they're being told, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Right. And yet no one's trying to educate them.
100%.
Guys, there's not going to be some class. Right? There's not going to be some media literacy class that solves this. Like,
well, it's going to be but it's going to be the whole culture.
Looks so different. It
schools, parents, talk, everything.
Yeah, and I think before, like, if it was just you had Walter Cronkite and you you could trust that he was delivering and everyone had this consensus, like, if that looks really different now, there needs to be mechanisms to help young people understand what they're actually seeing.
So let's stop on this for a second too, because Walter Cronkite, the idea that he was the most trusted man in America was a complete fiction perpetrated by Walter Cronkite and CBS News back in the day. The poll that underpins that it doesn't actually show that at all. But news trust and confidence in the media started declining in the 70s, and it's been pretty much of a straight line. Nellie, talk a little bit about why did people lose trust in the media? Is it just we're all ultra skeptics, or what did the media do something wrong?
Yeah, our media wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
The institutions failed. The institutions were not good enough, and like I said at the start, you could suddenly see past the curtain. You could see people. You could see what reporters were posting. You could see what reporters were really thinking, and you could see that their work product was most likely extraordinarily biased, and that the branding and the tone of objectivity was
another thing that happened. I mean, you're suggesting when you saw behind the work product in the age of Twitter and stuff. Oh, these people really think this, or at the bar, or I met one. However, the right, beginning in the 1980s, relentlessly and more, a pivotal part of their pitch was. Not, they didn't use the word fake news yet, but this is fake news. This is all biased. Every network, everything, it's all liberal, it's all liberal, it's all liberal. Now, that wasn't 100% untrue. Of course, there was a germ of truth in that. But the degree to which that was how the conservatives of mainstream conservatives at that time were teaching and their audience. And people,
so this is the drumbeat of people like Newt Gingrich in the 90s, mostly forgotten now, but he would rail against the liberal press.
Yes, and the liberal media.
And he was not necessarily wrong 100%.
No, and conservatives.
I believe you that was happening, but I came to that conclusion of my own without any drumbeat of any.
But to push back on that, how can you not expect that a human being, like journalists are not aliens who suddenly are wiped of all of their experiences and their and perspective. So how can, and I think part of what young people's relationship now too is it feels so intimate and personal because you are seeing that veil unveiling of the
well, you were saying before, people are
experiences.
foregrounding, this is who I am, and this is what I believe, and now I'm going to kind of do my spiel, as opposed to pretending that I am authoritative and I see everything and I'm objective.
Yeah, and I think what consumers are looking for is just to be like truthful about where you're coming to the information from and saying, hey, just be upfront about it, and that breeds trust.
The old institutions and the old institutional approach is gone. We all know that. That's what you're saying. Yeah. I'm saying it's sad, but it's gone. It's not coming back.
Is it? Let's also take a second to ask: is this bigger than media? This kind of loss of trust and confidence in institutions.
Totally.
A Gallup, everybody who charts this shows again from the early '70s, kind of a straight line decline.
And what we're about to see with artificial images, like I already find myself now, when I see a picture, I think, is this real? Is it not? My own lack of trust in what I'm seeing with my eyes, images, it's profound. Like, I think this shift is going to be across everything. And so, yeah, we're gonna have to live in a very low trust society, in a very low trust world. And that's going to be probably a little scary.
That also creates an opportunity then for trusted brokers and information, because when you go to them,
there's opportunities. There's opportunities. The free press arose out of distrust, right? The free press arose out of, we said that this institution can no longer be trusted. You can trust us.
Right.
And so it arose out of that fragmentation and that catastrophe. But I think the catastrophe is going to be so much more than in media.
But I think there's huge opportunity, and it goes back to sort of the intimate relationship piece of all of this, and having that relationship with your audience, where, people, you have to trust someone. People trust their friends, the people who are close to them, their family members. Maybe.
Maybe.
Depends on the family.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But there's not, if the trust in institutions isn't there, there's still going to be trust in someone and something, and people trust themselves. And so that goes back to my point about why you have to give your readers credit, and you have to actually believe that they can be discerning, which, from the perspective of young people, most young people are extremely discerning. You have to pass their sniff test. And so I'm kind of hopeful about that. I think that young people aren't just going to believe what you put in front of them. They're going to go and do their own research and take stock of the facts. The most common thing when I ask, and I do ask about this often, like, where do you get your news and information? And young people consistently tell me they like to look at different perspectives across the political and ideological spectrum, or across a range of opinions on culture or whatever it is, and then and see what everybody's saying, and then come to some conclusion in the middle. And maybe to Kurt's point, maybe AI is good as bringing that all together, but I do think that people want to hear from a range of perspectives and not just be told this is what is.
I have a question about trust, if I can.
Please.
We talked about the Washington Post at length, and that was sort of inside baseball, somewhat less inside baseball on this issue, of course. I know you're not the head of CBS News, but the CBS News trust thing, and it's getting close to making people have doubts about its trustworthiness over the...
Because it's been in third place for 1,000 years.
What has?
Right? CBS News.
No.
CBS News was the lowest rated.
But 60 Minutes has been fine.
Sure.
And so, one understands, like, you want to challenge the liberal priors and all that of reporting cultures. However, I mean, 60 Minutes is the remnant, to my way of thinking, of the Tiffany network. Like, it's a good thing. It's not perfect, it's not this, but like doing that in prime time and still getting 10 million people, whatever it is, a week to watch it, is quite something. So to begin to say, oh, why are they doing this now? Oh, because they have these new billionaire owners who like Trump, and like that's a tricky place to be. I mean, I'm not suggesting necessarily that David Ellison is Jeff Bezos, but
what's the question?
I don't know. Discuss. Yeah. I'm saying that it's. I'm struck by, before you said, oh, the Washington Post should have done this, they should have gone more left. Well, to me, people who own media institutions shouldn't actually mainly be thinking about it. Am I left, am I center, or am I right? Of course, you're correct that there's no center. I think it's like, really, I mean, not to be too Pollyanna, but like a search for the truth, an interesting truth, an entertaining truth, without fear or favor. All that stuff is what they should do. And sometimes that pisses off people on the left, sometimes it pisses off people on the right. Whatever, go for it. That's what I'm saying.
I agree.
Okay, good.
I agree.
Good.
I mean, I think what you're getting at is the idea, you think it's misguided that a media organization needs to think about whether they're blind spots or whether, like, I think it's a problem if a media organization doesn't have any reporters who are politically mixed or different from the central cohort. Like,
I agree with that.
I think it's a problem that the New York Times op-ed page, their conservatives are still never Trumpers. Like, they literally don't have a Trumper. I think they should. I think it reflects. It's more interesting.
Should the New York Times become more New York Timesy And be like, why are we even pretending?
Economically, maybe, yes. But I mean, like, in my sort of ideal vision of what a great newsroom is, there's that political tension.
Right.
And there's that political conversation that helps us represent America, and that helps capture America, and like report on America.
Can I ask, so if we are in a new era where like the old world is dead, it's not coming back, we can learn from it, but we don't want to go back there, maybe places like the New York Times or CBS News or whatever, they should be more opinionated and openly so that people can kind of gauge how to take that.
I think they would have more younger viewers if they did that, and also if they, expanded into social, which it seems like both are. But I think that just from what I'm hearing in my research is that young people want to know where this is coming from.
Right.
They want to know who is responsible for it. What is the behind the scenes process of the reporting? They want transparency. And if a newsroom, has these, all news is paid for by someone, just be upfront about it and then allow the reporters, the journalists, whomever, to show that process. How is it actually made? And sometimes I think, for example, when I was working at CNN writing for the website, we were very careful purposefully about not, I was never allowed to insert myself into the story. I never would do that. And that was, at the time, like that was, I was very cognizant of that, whereas now I write in a totally different way. I think it just depends on what is the purpose of the content, who is the content for, and obviously there are some directives that have to be top down, but I think the more that journalists can be transparent about their storytelling and about where it's coming from, the better.
And I just think that you can't do good journalism if there's not political tension or a willingness to go against your own politics.
Absolutely.
You can't tell a good story. It will be, first of all, it'll be boring because it'll be propaganda. Mm-hmm. Second of all, you'll just miss things because there's a hell of a lot that doesn't confirm my priors, or that doesn't necessarily help my political project, or that doesn't necessarily make me feel good. And it's important for us to report on that and to push towards that. And I think that there has been in the legacy media a real comfort in staying in the warm bath of your cohort politically, telling stories that your audience agrees with, telling stories that you agree with. And it's not going to work. It's not working now, and it's not going to work long term because of what the future holds, in part. Maybe it worked 100 years ago, but
yes, no, I agree with that. And I judge institutions by the degree to which they are willing to be non-binary in that sense, ideologically. No, truly. No, I think excessive binariness is a problem across the board beyond gender to discourse in life.
We're talking about changes in media, the media landscape. Who is a journalist, who is a reader and a consumer? Let's start by talking about how you got into the business of being some kind of journalist, some kind of writer, some kind of media, content creator, whatever. Kurt, what happened?
Graduated high school a little early and went to work for the Omaha World Herald as a 17-year-old, and that gave me a taste. And then,
what year was that?
That was 1930, I think.
Yeah.
It was 1972. Then went off to college.
1855.
Then went off to college and decided to be on. I went to Harvard. Decided to be on the Lampoon rather than the Crimson, and that was like my a pivotal role for me, like going to magazines, going to this thing that isn't just straight serious future New York Times reporter journalism, and and sort of hop between both things the rest of my life.
Being a journalist back then in 1972, what was the model? Was it you are going to be investigative, you're going to be bringing down presidents, and unmasking horrible things?
I was in Washington getting an award from Richard Nixon on the day after Watergate. Just want to say.
Wow.
But no, I mean, it was just like, oh, you can write well? This is interesting and fun? I'd been on my school papers, really, is the point. And then, like, this can be a job? Cool. And, my other thought was, should I go into academia or this? Like, no, this. Should I go into very serious journalism or maybe not necessarily? Maybe not necessarily. So it's just those choices you make along the way. So no, it wasn't, no, I did not have the, maybe to my detriment, did not have the yes, I will be the new Woodward.
You're going to
Bernstein.
comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
100% that.
Yeah, okay.
But not literally. I mean, I was too lazy, really, I don't like talking to people I don't know. I don't like introducing myself and saying, hey, how do you feel about your daughter dying or whatever. I just,
Nellie, how about you? How did
The
you?
exact opposite. I
Okay.
love talking to people I don't know.
Yeah.
You
love going to grieving widows, things like that. Disaster scenes.
To just.
How did you get into
the idea that there's a job where you could just talk to people and that was allowed, and you could just wander up to anyone, go to any scene you wanted, and you sort of had an excuse to be there and chat. It was the coolest thing in the world. So I graduated. I came back to my hometown in San Francisco and started as a unpaid intern at the San Francisco Chronicle.
No. And you were
loved
inspired
it
by
from
Nellie
day one.
Bly, right?
I love Nellie Bly.
Who is Nellie Bly and why was she?
Amazing investigative
Yeah.
reporter. We shared the same name, so I always thought she was very cool. But I actually don't know. I don't know if closing the institutions was a good thing. That was her big
but
thing.
she
I don't know if
went
actually
into mental institutions
Yes.
pretending to be crazy and then reported from the inside.
And now I've got 2 young kids, so now I write like funny takes on the news and sit at home and have a different kind of life. But for the, I guess, 12 years I was doing features reporting, being able to work at an old newspaper where you could get on a plane and go on an adventure, or just wander around your city and go on adventures and meet people, is the coolest job in the world.
Okay.
And I can't wait to do it again. We got to get those kids to boarding school so I can get started with that.
There are still orphanages that you can find them in. Rachel?
I started like most, I think, young students are. I was on my high school newspaper, but what I really loved to do was like walk around the halls of the high school and ask our school how students felt about things, and that's essentially what I still do now. I do qualitative journal. I do focus groups with young people, and I write about the takeaways. So there was a long path, between then and now, but essentially the root of it is the same thing. And I kind of just like crowdsourcing and seeing trends and being able to dissect those. But when I was in college, my 4 years of college were the 4 years of Trump's first term, and I started writing about the youth-led activism that was pushing back against many of the actions or lack of action in his first term. And then after COVID, I was at CNN. I was covering young voters and youth political culture, and I started to see that our generation, which had been cast as this super liberal generation, was maybe not as liberal as everyone thought that we were. And so again, those high level trends, started documenting that over time and decided to launch a Substack in 2022 to really just focus on youth culture and politics. So my route was windy. When I first started, I was freelancing a lot, even when I was in college. I also was writing a little bit for the magazine associated with the Crimson, but I was freelancing. I was writing for places like Teen Vogue and MTV News. I had an internship at Vice News in 2018.
Okay, Harvard kids with all your fancy internships over here. Look at you
from
two.
Nebraska,
It's
honey.
enough of the Harvard in this.
Public high school.
Let's shift to talking about then, there's this question of accountability. Who are journalists and who are media organizations, newsmakers, news gatherers accountable to? The 1976 movie Network is often heralded as one of the sharpest and funniest satires of the news business, the television news business. It anticipated a shift towards entertainment in the news. Network was a dark comedy about the rise of corporate interests meddling in the news. And it talked about a world where profits would outweigh the public service that journalism was supposed to accomplish, things like exposing corruption or holding the powerful accountable. In many ways, the world that Network was satirizing, one where news competes with entertainment programs and becomes indistinguishable, is upon us. There's also another shift that we've talked about already, about how journalists can now have their own platform and build an audience around a cult of personality outside of the mechanisms, both good and bad, of mainstream news institutions, things like editorial oversight, standards and practices, gatekeeping. I want to talk about accountability for journalists and also for news organizations. Who are they accountable to? Are they accountable to the audience, to the truth, to wherever their money is coming from? Who is news being reported for? Nellie, let's start with you. At the Free Press, this is a subscriber-driven enterprise, although you have investors as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so who Who are you accountable to when you guys are writing there?
I feel very accountable to our readers and our subscribers, and the difference between being at the Times and now being at the Free Press and writing my column is I feel a really intimate relationship with the subscriber. Like, people send in photos of where they're reading the column, we post those photos. It's very, I read through most of the comments every week. I really, it's just more intimate, a Substack. You probably feel that same way. So I feel accountable to them. Like, when I screw something up or get a fact wrong, like, I feel bad about betraying that relationship in a way that before I felt bad about betraying my boss or the Times Trust or something like that. And so, yeah, it's very like intimate.
Is
Substack.
that good or bad though? Because they also will express disapproval, not because you got this fact wrong, but because, like, I thought I knew you and you made a take that I disagree with.
They yell at me a lot. I mean, but they yell at me about all sorts of things. So I can't quite please them ideologically because there's no singular yelling. But
is that good though? Do you think that's healthy for journalists to be that intimate with their direct audience?
Not always.
Yeah.
I don't think always.
And
I wouldn't say it's a universal thing. I think it works for me at this stage in my career. I think being that intimate with the subscriber, knowing them, sort of being in communication with them, worked for me as a mid-30s journalist. I don't know if that would have been good for a 22-year-old. And I think that the protection of the institution is really important, especially when you're starting your career. But for me now, that is the reality of it. I mean, it's like when you're writing books, you're selling directly to a reader. It's a more intimate thing. You're not buttressed by an institution.
Kurt, you were the co-founder of Spy Magazine, which blended entertainment and investigative news. You guys broke actually a lot of stories that people in power definitely did not, were not happy about and things like that. Is there, when you look at shows that kind of are the stepchildren of Spy, something like The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, is there a problem with entertainment becoming news and vice versa?
Well, as you say, that it was a new thing 25 years ago at this point, about which I wrote a novel, in fact, 25 years ago. So, yeah, there are problematic aspects, as there are to all these things we're talking about, whether it's AI or too many channels, a million channels, all the rest. I don't think it has been too problematic, actually. I mean, the blurring of fiction and reality has its bad, horrible, dangerous, potentially catastrophic sides. But I think, actually, all those three examples of Jon Stewart's Daily Show and his appearances on it these days, as well as the Colbert Report, as well as, God knows, John Oliver, who does a lot of hard work with that staff on research and everything, as modes of presenting and consuming entertaining versions of the news, I think they've all done amazing jobs. And I think actually there were lessons along the way that the straight, normal, traditional network news could have learned and didn't, just about like video clip research that the Daily Show was doing 20 years ago and stuff. So I don't think, in terms of ranking bad things that have happened in the news media the last 20 years, that is not high on my list.
What about this question of who are you accountable to? Something like the New York Times used to be advertising driven. That was, and advertisers have a certain amount of say, maybe not like calling up the editor or the publisher and saying, you ran that story, you so-and-so, but papers know, we're not going to run these kinds of stories, partly because of what you were talking about previously. But now it gets most of its revenue through subscribers. Is this the problem of, like, do you get captured by your audience?
Well, again, it requires a moral temperament to, as you're suggesting you are with your readers, to, yes, they're my readers and they approve of me or they like what I say or think, but you have to be willing to piss them off and not be Fox News, like, oh no, don't get crosswise with MAGA or they'll go away. So it's you have to be willing to have some people hate you, even people who were in your tent sometimes, because like, oh no. And the social media experience is requiring enough of a thick skin to feel that.
Rachel, you're on Substack, which is a subscriber-driven platform. Are you accountable? Like, who are you accountable to?
To my audience, and I think just the point about being accountable to an audience. You have to give readers credit that they want to feel challenged, that they want to engage with content that they don't fully agree with. And I think that any organization or journalist who starts to doubt that is doing a disservice both to themselves, their audience, and also to the industry writ large. I think that that's really important to understand that people are nuanced and that they can hold a multitude of perspectives. And when it starts to get tribal, that's when it gets really dangerous. So that's one thing I think about the audience. But yeah, of course, I'm loyal to my audience. That's who is, I think I try really hard to listen to the perspectives of the young people that I'm talking to, and then to share that with the audience, and to be sort of that conduit of how young people are thinking to the best degree that I can. Obviously, I don't speak for all young people, but I try to listen to them and sort of regurgitate it back out with analysis and insights with the audience in mind, and what would serve them, and what do people need to know about what's happening with youth culture today. So that's who I'm loyal to, but I think it's really important to, at the same time, be sort of loyal to your audience and be responsive to your audience, to also challenge them.
Does the shift to, not necessarily anybody here, but among content creators, let's say journalists / content creators, about being authentic, does that get in the way of that accountability, or does that further it?
A little bit. I mean, I think it's kind of ironic. We talk so much about authenticity, and certainly, Gen Z rejects overproduced content, but at the same time, you can be really selective about what you share online, and you're not putting your whole life, even if you are, showing a day in my life, like, you're not showing every single part of every single day of your life unless you're streaming live for 24 hours, which some people do. I think that, no one is really truly, like, everyone's putting out a version of themselves that they want the world to see. But that's true in all parts of life, whether it's on social media or, in a conversation we're having privately.
Let's talk about one of the major shifts in news landscapes now is, how do you get it? And we all look up in the sky and say algorithm. The algorithms are feeding us stuff. We are passive receivers of whatever it is that's on our phone. This is the story. It's not necessarily the reality. But more and more young people get their news, or like exclusively, from social media or from their phones. Algorithms are known to reward anger, rage, can also feed people the same take, the same topic and whatnot. Rachel, you've said that Gen Z is actually interested in getting a wide range of perspectives. Are they doing that?
I hear from a lot of young people that they're actively seeking out and will go and look at something that's coming from CNN, we'll look at something that's coming from Fox, we'll look at something that's coming from like the AP or Reuters as sort of the middle of the ground. They are seeking that out, and I think it's frustrating to young people that when they're scrolling, they feel they get into an echo chamber where they're only shown one thing over and over again, and they, this is the most diverse generation in American history. Our elections are razor thin. They're growing up in communities, even if they live in big cities, that are ideologically mixed. And so what happens on their phone does not reflect what's happening in the world around them a lot of the time, because they are face to face with people that they disagree with. And so they want to see that reflected on their social platforms too.
Are you buying that, Kurt? And you and I are of a vintage where we remember the great quote attributed to Pauline Kael. When Nixon won re-election in 1972, she was like, "How could that happen? I don't know anybody who voted for him."
Yeah, exactly. Which is still the great, left bubble comment.
But I mean, we're more polarized than ever? Is our news media more of a monoculture, not across the board, but in
several
what people
monocultures.
confuse?
Well, I mean, yes, both things are true. But I do think there's probably always been a relative minority of people who go out and I want all opinions. I want to look at all this. I mean, it was helpful when every city had one or two newspapers, and they had that covered the bases, and it wasn't legacy liberal bias. It was whatever they had in Cincinnati or, Des Moines, and there, so that was not a bad thing. So the ability to be in a bubble, technologically, if nothing else, that 24/7 you can be hearing and watching nothing but what you want, whether it's on TikTok or whether it's on cable news. So that's not good. But so I think, I don't know, I have no idea. If I don't think fewer young people than young people 30 years ago or 50 years ago were doing that, but there was not the opportunity 30 years ago, 50 years ago to be in these electronically enabled echo chamber bubbles.
Yeah.
So,
but it was also hard to get information, right? Like if you're in Des Moines, you're reading the Des Moines Register.
That's what you got.
Yeah, and maybe, I don't even know if they had an alt weekly, but there's like two sources now you can stumble on.
And the local news.
And
local
people
news.
Writing for the Des Moines Register lived in Des Moines, which is, you can't find.
Just as bankers used to give mortgages to people they knew.
Yeah.
Do we know, are people consuming less news, however defined overall? I mean, certainly newspapers are not doing well. They lose subscribers.
And all media company traffic is falling, and it's...
Yeah.
I don't think that means they're consuming less news.
I agree.
We're constantly inundated with so much on social media, and it's how, I don't know, it depends how you define news.
That's
Is
the
news
question.
entertainment?
Yes. Right.
You could say, that a podcaster who's talking about current events, like, that's news.
Sure. But Real Housewives of, Schenectady, probably not. Right?
No. That's our entertainment.
Logan Paul in the middle of a fight shouting
learned,
stock tips is news.
I feel like, what we're talking about, people don't pay enough attention to serious things, whether it's international news or politics.
My serious things.
I
they
think
don't pay
people
enough
are paying
attention to me.
attention.
And people don't, half of America has never paid close attention to news, period. And is that different? I don't know. No, probably it's not.
I think people are paying attention in part because they're forced to, whether it's because they live in Minneapolis and there's so much tension in their community, or because, as I mentioned before, a shooting. Like, people are living through crisis every single day. They're paying attention to news because news is their lives.
Okay, wait. What if, in part the fall of the legacy and in part the fall of the traffic to news sites is because actually things are pretty good for a lot of people right now, and they're pretty happy, and they're kind of relaxed.
No, they're not happy.
And they're happy getting TikTok-tainment
No,
nuggets.
but they're not happy, and most young
how do
people
you
don't
know
like.
they're not happy though? Because
I've
this is
asked
something.
them.
Well,
it's relative.
Gallup and other surveys.
Like, there's not a war. There's not a draft. There's not
There's an interesting bifurcation always, where if you ask people, how are you doing? 70-80% of Americans usually say I'm doing pretty well. What's the direction of the country? And it's like 20%. So there's an interesting...
It's like people say about their own public school versus public schools in general. They all kind of like their school.
To kind of in this point, and you mentioned Minneapolis, this is a great example of like the ICE shootings that happened in the past few weeks. It was, one thing that was interesting is that people were able to have their own version of the facts. And the Trump administration very publicly said, oh, you know what? Alex Preddy was an assassin who came there to shoot federal agents that day. Then a bunch of different, videos, kind of proliferated, and people, even Donald Trump said, oh yeah, that's not really true. Are we in an age now where it is easier than ever for people not to agree on basic facts? Or are we actually doing a really good job through a decentralized news gathering, technology, where we're forcing people to actually have to confront a shared reality? I
would say this is a very good example of where it's a good thing and where it's part of the golden age. Because, I look at the polling among young voters, especially Gen Z voters, and people, right? They're, yes, a lot of them voted for Trump. Yes, a lot of black and brown people voted for Trump. But like, where has the cratering of support for Donald Trump happened among those people? Because perhaps it's a function of getting no. They murder this person, and their opinions change. So that they are not politically, ideologically tribal. They are responding to facts on the ground.
Yes.
And yes, Trump and the administration, lots of people, oh no, she was trying to run him over. Well, don't believe your lying eyes. And you look at the polling on that, 70, 80% or whatever. They may be saying it, but it's still their cult that buys it.
Alex Preddy and the Renee Good, I mean, those videos and how that made Trump's line kind of impossible is the best example of the new media and what it can be. Like, which is basically, we all get to see all of these videos.
You can't gaslight.
Yeah, you can't gaslight.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, because you can imagine 20 years ago, we'd get the police statement,
Correct.
we'd get the government statement, and we'd get, parent is sad. Well, of course they're sad. Like, we wouldn't have any of this. I mean, it is
So
amazing. It is amazing.
That is a great way to talk about this as, what is best about the golden age that we may or may not be in. That we don't necessarily want to talk about it that way. Let's just, as a closing thought, what do you think, and we'll go around the horn and we'll start with Nellie, what do you think is the most positive kind of trend or thing that is happening in media right now that's good for journalists who don't really matter that much, but also good for the public?
I think, the proliferation of video, I think, is actually really good. It comes in good ways, like with Renee Good and Alex Preddy, where you can see for yourself what happened, and I think that stuff like Ring's search party is really interesting, where you realize, okay, every house has video. Like, it's harder to deny reality when so much of it is going to be recorded, even as it can be manipulated, all this. But I think that will be very interesting when so much of real life is recorded on video.
It's fascinating.
It's a way into truth that we've never had before.
Yeah, and it will not get rid of all of the questions, because a lot of times things are obscure, literally and figuratively, but it is a new world. And when you consider, some people talk about the modern age of news gathering, or, starting with the Rodney King film, the videotape, where it's like, without that videotape, there's no Rodney King beating story. And that videotape is kind of grainy, and that it was pretty decisive. But theres a lot of times where you won't. Things are open to interpretation.
Right.
What do you? Kurt, what about?
Yes, the universal surveillance thing has good parts, but of course, as we read in 1984, bad things.
That's right. Yeah,
I would say. Yes, but also the proliferation of audio. That all of the thousands and tens of thousands of podcasts that exist, and they range from the ridiculous or terrible or wrong or bad to the brilliant. I would say to my taste for good podcasts, and it's eclectic, from wonky things to Ezra Klein, who's kind of wonky, and to flagrant. The Andrew Schultz thing, which I like. That is a new and glorious thing of a kind that didn't exist, and so accessible, and such a proliferation. So I think that's a fantastic thing.
Great. Rachel?
I would say the best thing is that the appetite is there. People want content, people want to be informed, and it shows that our democracy is working, because people that you cannot gaslight them. They will seek out, as we mentioned, audio and video accounts of what has actually happened from people on the ground who are there to witness it, and they're going to spread it far and wide.
Rachel Janfazza, Kurt Anderson, Nellie Bowles, thanks for talking to Open to Debate.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
That's it for this week. A big thank you to you, the audience, for tuning in. This episode was made possible thanks to a generous gift from Liberty Ears Foundation. Our work is also made possible by listeners like you, the Rosencrantz Foundation, and supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our founder. Our CEO is Leah Mathau. I'm Nick Gillespie. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.